Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session of our 2021 Forum for Excellence. We are so excited to have you here with us today. Just a couple housekeeping items as I see individuals are coming into the room and getting settled. We do invite you to post any comments, questions into the chat box there. We do encourage you to post your questions in the chat on Zoom and not the chat on Whova, as the presenters are able to see the chat on Zoom. As we move through the day, we will be move through the presentation, we will be pausing for questions. So go ahead and post those in there as they come along. In addition, this session will be recorded, and all of the sessions at the Forum for Excellence have been recorded. Those will be available on our website following the forum. Give us about a week or two to get everything posted. In addition to that, if you are seeking professional development certification or professional development certificate, we encourage you to make sure your name is reflective of your name. We want to be sure that we don't have just numbers or your email handle on there. So whatever name you would like to appear on the certificate, please go to your name, right click on that more, and rename yourself to the proper name. With that, I am very excited today to open up our final general session for the Forum for Excellence. We're going to be covering economic impact of Illinois community colleges, and our speakers today are Dr. Brian Richard from NIU Center for Governmental Studies and Nathan Wilson from the ICCB, and he is the Deputy Director for Research at the Illinois Community College Board. He has led the agency research and data analysis efforts for more than 10 years. In recent months, he has added oversight and information systems to his oversight. Since joining ICCB in 2001, so happy 20th anniversary there, Nathan. He has acted as a resource to the Illinois Community College system and the state and federal stakeholders on issues related to performance, accountability, and strategic planning. Mr. Wilson provides oversight to the ICCB centralized data system, processes to produce numerous reports, tables, analytic tools for the Illinois Community College system and other interested parties. He serves as the ICCB lead with the Illinois Longitudinal Data System and the state data cross-agency efforts, and lends his experience to numerous state and national committees. So thank you, Nathan, for joining us today. Also with Nathan is Brian Richard. Brian joined the Center for Governmental Studies in January of 2013. Previously, he was an assistant professor in the Department of Economics and Workforce Development at the University of Southern Mississippi, where he taught courses focused on qualitative research methods, economic development, finance, and business recruiting and retention. At CGS, his work concentrates on evaluation of workforce development programs, impact of economic development projects, local retail and industrial analysis, and research in the state of the Northern Illinois economy. Brian serves as the founding editor of the Journal of Economic Development in Higher Education, has extensive experience in conducting economic and fiscal impact studies, retail analysis, workforce analysis, and policy studies. He is our data guy. Both of these gentlemen are. Brian wants people to know that CGS has staff with a diverse set of skills and experiences, and that CGS studies much more than government. Brian was an Army psychological operations specialist, and he has earned a Ph.D. in International Development, Masters of Science in Applied Economics, and a Bachelor's of Arts in Finance. He also holds an Economic Development Finance Professional certification, and Brian has completed multiple marathons and triathlons, including the Ironman triathlon. So welcome to you both, and I will now hand the floor over, and I believe that Brian is starting us off.
I think that's Nathan, actually.
Nathan will start us off. Thank you.
Get this back here, 1 second. Thanks, Amy. I appreciate that. I hope everyone is doing well and happy Friday. I know my colleagues work very hard in providing you the best possible conference and forum for excellence each year, and so I noticed there was just an extreme amount of really good sessions this year, and I hope you're able to glean some good information over the last couple days. I want to thank you for inviting us today. What we plan to do is provide you some fairly high-level findings from the soon-to-be-released economic impact study. We haven't quite released it yet. That will happen midweek next week, actually. So, many of you are employed, of course, by community colleges. And if you're not, I know we have some adult ed programs and other entities participating in the Forum for Excellence, you are likely currently collaborating or partnering with one, right? So what we want to share with you today is how community colleges are impactful on a couple fronts. And so my colleague, Dr. Richard here will shortly be walking you through those findings along with his colleague, Andy Blanke as well. So we tackled this on a couple fronts. One being the return on investment from a community college credential from a student perspective, right? But secondly, we also looked at community colleges and how they're economic engines for the communities where they reside, both as employers, but also the goods and services they purchase as well, and how those dollars cascade through the community. So our intent with this study is to empirically provide to interested parties basically the value of Illinois community colleges. So we think there's a lot of purposes where this study can be utilized and throughout all facets of the community college. So hopefully, when this is released, you pull it down and can find some different components or parts that may be beneficial to your area of work. And so before I turn over to NIU here, I did want to provide you with a little more context, and I'll do that briefly. And so in terms of collaboration with this wasn't done in isolation between NIU, Center for Governmental Studies, and the ICCB. Myself, and I think many of you have probably worked or are working with Jay Brooks. We sort of led the data efforts from the ICCB side. ICCB's Chief of Staff, Matt Berry, on the media public relations side, he's led those efforts. And then really we worked across all divisions and facets within the ICCB. So many of my colleagues on the CTE and workforce side, academic affairs, fiscal, and student services as well. We also formed an economic impact study advisory committee made up of a nice cross section of individuals within the system, presidents, institutional researchers, workforce folks, fiscal, student services, academic officers. So we really wanted to get input from all aspects of the community college system as we went through different drafts and iterations of the report. And NIU, Center for Governmental Studies, this is the third time we've contracted with them to produce a report like this. And I know many of our colleges also work with the Center for Governmental Studies and Brian, and so they're very reputable and very well respected in terms of these sorts of economic studies. And so I did want to provide you with the colleges and individuals involved on the advisory committee and certainly provide my thanks. We really utilized the advisory committee and they weren't a shy bunch. And so what we'll be sharing today, that first version looked much different than the final version. So we went through a number of different iterations and methodologies to have the best report possible. And so that process started in earnest last fall, and we'll be releasing the report next week. Just a brief history here. I kind of alluded to this already, but we try to do this economic impact study every 5 to 6 years. In 2007 and 2014, as I said, we produced these reports in collaboration with the Center for Governmental Studies at NIU. So what are the deliverables as part of this? Today, we'll be just highlighting the statewide report, right? But Brian and his team also produce economic impact study for each community college district. And that has a number of different benefits. One being it's standardized. The measures and metrics are consistent across the system. And so those reports have been provided, those final reports have been provided to each IR shop at each community college district. So if you'd like to have more information about that, I suggest you contact your IR lead at your community college. Brian will be going through this here briefly, but as part of each statewide or as part of the statewide report and each district level report, there's 3 different components. An environmental scan, where we look at a number of different external factors that are impacting the community college, but also workforce as well. And then the economic impact analyses based on the student, and then also the community college itself. And so, as I said, we try to do these every 5 to 6 years, and we always think of ways to try to enhance these with each iteration. So in prior versions, in previous years when we did this, we didn't have a robust environmental scan. And so particularly during a pandemic, we wanted to ensure there was context with the current environment we're all working in, right? So we took a pretty deep dive on demography, the current employment environment, and also emerging occupations and industries as well, currently, but also sort of thinking 10 years from now as well. And so I'm sure a lot of the sessions were centered on the Workforce Equity Initiative, WIOA, Perkins over the last couple of days. And so we know that within the community college system, we have engagement with the workforce already. And as part of our strategic planning, those are very central to those efforts. So we highlighted that as well within the report. And then we enhanced and provided more detailed analysis around the student outcomes as well. So we looked at different areas of study. As you all know, community colleges offer short-term, long-term, associate applied sciences, transfer degrees. So we also disaggregated by those different degree lengths as well. And finally, before I turn it over here to Brian, you know, we know at the community college level, you know, folks are often spread thin, and what we didn't want to do is ask for a bunch of new data or information to produce these reports. So we really relied on information and data we already have at the Illinois Community College Board. So we didn't ask for any more information, and we're able to produce these reports as a value add for the data you already provide to the ICCB. So that came from our centralized data system, which is student level based. We collect a lot of financial information from community colleges as well. We work with the Department of Employment Security to match student data with wage data. So we're actually empirically able to track students and the career earnings they have within their jobs and occupations. And then Brian and his team use in-plan modeling software for the community college impacts within your communities economically. And we did have to ask for one small piece from the colleges, but that was just a couple questions in terms of the in-district, out-of-district flow for district employees. And so with that, I'll turn over to my colleague, Dr. Richard.
All right, let's see if we can move over to my screen. All right, now you see the table of contents of the report. So as Nathan mentioned, this report, both statewide and each college's report really mirror this statewide report. Starts with an environmental scan type of section, which takes about 20 pages. I know many of you probably have had full environmental scans done for your colleges, and the ones my colleagues and I do at at NIU can run 100 to 120 pages of data and tables and analysis. So this was really an attempt to just really hit the highlights of what's important for in terms of the local economy and demographic trends. So I'll just start by walking through the basics of what's included. We look at some population trends, comparing either the state or each district with the rest of the region and the national trends. Look at some population changes over the last decade in terms of the race and ethnicity mix. And again, for your college level reports, you'll see another line in these tables with your district data. Because the community college districts have such strange boundaries that don't follow any, typically regions where data are released. For many of these, we had to approximate your districts by using a set of counties. So that was another part of the process we worked through with each college, making sure we had the most appropriate geography where we're using to present this demographic data for your local districts. Looked at some data on the age of folks in your in the state and in the local areas. So we started off by looking at some historical trends, then now we're looking into the future. Most of this demographic data comes from MC, which I know many of you use as well. While the source is MC, most of it is based on federally collected data like the Census Bureau, American Community Survey, and Bureau of Labor Statistics data. Some projections about college age population. This one was interesting. There were pretty significant differences at the college district level. Some are projected to increase the college age projections. Here you can see the statewide projections are statewide expected to decline by 2025. So after the demographics section, we started looking at some employment data, both by industry and by occupation group. So again, here we're looking at historical trend over the last decade or so, from 2010 to 2020. How has the mix of employment changed at the industry level? We also looked at some job posting data. So this data source is becoming much more sophisticated, where traditionally there's been a couple of main companies, Burning Glass and MC, that did this. They are currently in the process of merging, so that they're going to combine their forces to produce this. But really scraping the job postings to see what, this is as close to real-time demand as we can get in terms of demand for different types of workers. Truck drivers almost universally were the highest in demand across the state, but also see a lot of healthcare, nursing and related kinds of healthcare. A lot of sales jobs also show up in these job posting data. Looked at job postings by industry. Again, not surprising with truck driving at the top. The transportation and warehousing also shows up at the top of the job posting industries. Second, administrative and support and waste management. They also hire a lot of truck drivers, so sort of see the correlation there. But you can also, again, see the healthcare. Manufacturing is pretty significant, and that's one that we saw pretty big variation from district to district. And then the job posting data, they really get into the details of what's included in the job postings, and so they have some algorithms that can pull out what type of skills are in high demand in these job postings. And so here again, you see flatbed truck operation near the top, but some merchandising. So getting at some of those sales skills that show up in a lot of the job postings and the healthcare, of course. Top qualifications. So here's something where in some cases you can see a direct correlation between what's happening in the job postings and the programs that you're offering in your colleges. Certified nursing assistant with the commercial driver's license, Bachelor of Science nursing. Nursing is one of those interesting occupations. Registered nurses in the federal data, they include with their projections for employment a typical education level. The federal data shows that the typical education level for registered nurses is this Bachelor of Science in Nursing. But as many of you know, many registered nurses come straight out of 2-year programs. And so that, is another indicator of the demand for that may not show up in some of the federal data for occupations that typically require a 2-year degree. And we looked at some of the trends in occupation employment. So here's some projections of annual openings for various occupations. And here we group these by the typical education level that was required. So here, these are occupations that often require a certificate or a license. Again, that truck driving shows up at the top, but some accounting, teaching, so nursing, so the teaching and healthcare again showing up over and over here. And we took the same approach. Occupations that typically require an associate degree. Again, a lot of teaching and healthcare in these occupations, but also some IT, the computer network support specialist. So again, these are areas where you can make direct comparisons with your program offerings. And I guess another interesting piece about these data, you can see some of these industries are actually expected to decline in overall employment over the next decade. You can see the negative growth rates in red, but there's still expected to be significant numbers of job openings in these occupations because of retirements or people changing jobs, either moving up the ladder to a higher level occupation or just changing to a different career field. So even in declining industries or occupations, there's still expected to be significant numbers of job openings and demand for graduates in these programs. We also looked at the aging of the workforce. So looked at occupations that had significant numbers of incumbent workers that are approaching retirement age. This occupation of morticians and undertakers, statewide, 55% of all of the workers in that occupation are over the age of 55. So they're going to be looking for a lot of replacement workers in the next few years in that. But you can see lots, many occupations have, over 25 or over 30% of the workforce that are over the age of 55. So again, an area where you're going to see significant job openings. Then we have a section on equity. First, we just sort of summarized some of the language in state plans focused on equity. It really has become a focus of many of the statewide economic development and workforce education plans. So we sort of summarized the language from those here at the beginning of the section, and then looked at some data surrounding, what are some equity indicators. And household income. This was an area where in some of the more rural areas, it was difficult to get data for all of the race and ethnicity groups because of just the small numbers. So some of you are going to because this is a median, we didn't really have median income. We didn't really have a way of combining the data from the individual counties into a district-wide estimate. So for the district level reports, we included data for each of the counties included in your region. And some of you are going to see a lot of holes in that table just because the data weren't available to because of the small populations in those rural counties. Look at poverty indicators. Again, here, what you see here is pretty typical of what we saw across the state. African Americans and the Latinx populations tend to be more likely to have higher poverty levels than white and Asian persons. Look at some historical educational attainment, starting with 2010 educational attainment rates and moving to 2019, which was the most recent data available. You can see, education levels are increasing over the past decade, but there's still significant differences among the race and ethnicity groups in terms of especially getting past high school into college and higher education rates. We looked at employment, a breakdown both by gender and in the percentage of non-white and Latinx persons that work in various occupations. Again, we broke this up by the occupations that typically require a certificate or license to start with. And so you can see for all occupations, of course, the workforce is about 50-50 male, female. The Illinois workforce is about 35% non-white and about 15% Latinx. But when you look into some of the specific occupations, we see some pretty significant departures from that. So, for example, if you look at nursing assistants, 89% female, 57% non-white. So very high levels of female and non-white workers, but it's one of the lower paying occupations in this set. And then very often you see the opposite for the higher paying occupations where, like firefighters, 5% female and 23% non-white, but the wages are on the higher end for this education level. So just trying to highlight some of the disparities at the occupation level. Again, same approach here with occupations that typically require an associate's degree. And then we included bachelor's level since many of your students you're feeding up into the four-year colleges. The disparities actually get greater the higher you move up the education level, which you could see from that beginning where non-whites tended to have lower levels of bachelor's degrees or higher. So that's kind of what drives some of these disparities at these higher education levels. Then we have a section just kind of summarizing some of the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic over the past, going on a year and a half or so. Unemployment rates. Here we highlight some national data just as comparison. So your local area reports will also have this national data in it just to kind of compare what's going on at the state local level to these national level impacts. Looked at so the Department of Employment Security publishes very detailed data about the people that apply for unemployment insurance. So we use those data to describe what's going on, by the demographics of those that applied for unemployment and what those trends were over as the pandemic hit and started subside. And again, we looked at it by, as we did with the employment data, by industry and by occupation. So you can see some of the different impacts between industries and occupations. And so that sort of concludes the look at what's going on in the statewide economy. And again, this is mirrored essentially for each local district. So from here, we turn to outcomes. And again, as Nathan said, connected, actual earnings data of actual people that completed programs at the community college. So, there are a lot of college outcome studies that just sort of use, what typical earnings are in the different occupations where students are completing programs. But we looked at actual people and what their actual earnings were once they moved out of their programs and into the workforce. So this is real actual student data from the completers in your programs. So again, this will be mirrored in your local reports. So just looking at, what are the enrollments in the various areas of instruction and categories. So the first part of this looks at return on investment. So this analysis is really focused on students that typically go directly into the workforce after they complete a program at a community college. So we're focused on students age 20 to 29 that completed a 2-year program that doesn't typically lead to transfer to a 4-year. So that was your AAS or long-term certificate programs, and looked at completers from FY 2018. And so we used some net price data from the College Navigator source. So this is the typical net price. This is a weighted average for the statewide, but that data, those data are available at the college level. So we use the actual data from your colleges in the local area outcomes. We also assumed, as most other return on investment studies for educational programs, that there's an opportunity cost to going to school. That time that a student spends in class and studying, they could have been earning an income in a job. So that foregone income is that opportunity cost. So the combination of the net price of attendance and opportunity cost was the total cost of attendance over those 2 years of them being in school. And then we looked at their earnings gains after they completed, projected out over a 40-year career and discounted using a net present value approach to get both the net present value of that initial investment in college and an internal rate of return. So in other words, if that student had invested this, $32,000 in an investment and earned $240,000 over the 40-year period, that would be a return on investment of about 27%. So just trying to show, the strong return on investment to your community college programs. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andy Blanke, who again used some of that actual earnings outcome data from your completers to look at some of the, what were the labor force impacts of completing your programs.
Thanks, Brian. So for the student outcome study, we're just going over the statewide results here, but where to the extent the data was available for each district, this information will be available for each individual community college as well. Just so you're aware for that. So we tried to look at student outcomes over several dimensions. We looked at the career job employment rate, which is the percentage of completers that are employed in stable full-time jobs after they graduate. We looked at their median earnings, and then we looked at this both for the terminal degrees, which would be associate in applied science or long-term certificate. And then we had a separate section for the short-term certificates that we will also be getting into. First item of interest is the career job employment rate. We looked at this for each graduating cohort from 2010 through 2018, and about 80% of completers were employed in career jobs after 1 year, regardless of which year we were looking at. And this finding was relatively stable across districts. In some schools, the employment rate was closer to 75%. In some, it was closer to 90%, but regardless, it was quite high across most districts for the terminal degrees. We also looked at the employment rate over time for those who graduated in 2009 by degree type. Employment rates improve over time for all completers, but they were highest for those that got an associate in applied science or a long-term certificate. And over time, the employment rate gap starts to narrow for those who completed in other programs, especially for transfers and for short-term degrees. We also compared employment rates by race and ethnicity. This one varied a lot depending on district. We discourage trying to compare employment rates for one district versus another because it's going to depend a lot on the jobs that are available in each district along with who is enrolling. Statewide, white completers usually had the highest employment rates. African American and completers had slightly lower employment rates, but this varied a lot depending on districts. Some areas had a lot more equity of outcomes. We compared employment rates by age, and not surprisingly, the highest employment rates were those in the prime working age range of 25 to 39. Employment rates were lowest for the youngest and oldest completers, which is not surprising because at the low end, we have more full-time students, and at the high end, we have people that are starting to transition towards retirement and working fewer hours.
Sorry, Andy, to interrupt you. I lost track of time, and I think we are trying to wrap up here. So,
sorry.
Any highlights that you might want to hit on last second?
Yes, you go down to short-term certificates. This is one that we got a lot of interest in as the report was being developed, and it's difficult to show for short-term certificates because a lot of the outcomes are not apparent until several years after. So how we tried to get at this is we tried to highlight in each college which certificates lead to high-paying jobs in each college that also have a lot of completers. These are of interest because it's something that can get someone into a really good career without spending a lot of time out of the labor market in college. And at the statewide level, 3 certificate programs that had strong earnings potential were for electrical installing, fire protection, and heating and AC repair. A lot of these programs were also true for individual colleges, but this information will be available for each of the district reports as well. So that is something to look forward to when these reports come out.
All right, thanks. Sorry for taking too much time on my section.
All right, thanks, Brian and Andy. We may just want to real quickly highlight or touch on the community college impact, if we could.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. So statewide, the Illinois community college system contributes about 3.5 billion in output to the statewide economy. And by output, we mean the value of goods and services produced and provided statewide. This is a result of both the college's operating impacts and the businesses supported because of those operations. The system supports about 33,000 jobs directly, but due to business transactions, due to the college's operations, the actual footprint in terms of employment is closer to 43,000 jobs. And in 2011, the community college, in 2020, the community college system served about 98,000 unique employers with custom training programs. So that's another aspect of the economic impact.
Great. Thanks, Brian and Andy, and I'll just wrap it up here. And so just a few real quick takeaways. And so literally hundreds of data points within these economic impact studies. And again, you have these, this report's available at each community college district. Your IR lead has the final version of this report, and you all are on the front lines, right? And so you have employer engagement. I think a number of these data items and data points could be utilized with those employers. If you think about grants and other things, showing the value add of a community college in your specific programs, I think this has a lot of utility. In terms of, there is a press conference next Wednesday at the Capitol building, so you'll probably see some media related to this. And we will have a dedicated website that we will get out to the system where you can download all these different materials next week. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy or Jennifer Foster here.
Okay, thank you, Nathan, Brian, and Andy. All of this information has been just absolutely wonderful, and we certainly look forward to the full report coming out very, very soon. So as we move through the end of the day, I know I'm standing in between you and your weekend. You have been very attentive over these last couple of days, a lot of information, and I hope that the sessions have brought you lots of information that you will move into implementation, restructure, or revitalization of your college programs, adult ed programs, and courses. I would like to take this time to just recognize all of the vendors. Thank you to all of the vendors who helped to support the 19th Forum for Excellence, and also the staff of ICSPS and SIPDC for putting all of this together. Thank you so much, as well as the staff of the ICCB. We are learning constantly, and I think Dr. Aiken said it best on yesterday. Equity is not something that we sit down and get it all in one setting, but it is a natural progression. If each of us that participated as a part of the sessions would apply one piece of knowledge that we've learned from this conference, what a difference this will make in the lives of our current students as well as our future students. So again, we hope that these sessions provided you with more insight into equity and how we must be able to apply what we've learned and apply it to us as to us as professional educators. And so again, we thank you. We thank you for your time. Be safe and have a wonderful weekend.